Last week we talked about a bunch of these Assyrian guys, and rather than keep going with the Syrians, I think that would confuse things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back up, and then we'll start going verse by verse with just the ones that we've talked about. Shalmaneser III was the first one we talked about last week. He's 858 to 824. He campaigned against Hadadezer. You'll remember him from the Bible. And he forced the Syrians to retreat to Damascus and hide. And when he did, then he went to the outskirts and demolished all the little towns and cities around. He was one of these guys that was a terror. I mean, just a real terror. And if you had the power, that's what you did. You used it. That's what makes God so different. God has the power. And we've offended him many times, and he doesn't use the power. I mean, that takes great restraint. This guy, we find an obelisk, the black obelisk over there, and it's the historical stone that has all the writing. It's in hieroglyphs. And in it, it talks about Jehu. It talks about the Bible figures that we know about. So we can say that this is a biblical figure here. We talked all about him. I'm just going to keep going. Slide 2. Here's the timeline. This is the way things lay out. I don't know if you can see. You probably can't see that. I'll make the notes available. Here's the timeline. You've got, of course, Israel, the northern tribes up north, and then Judah in the south. This is not exactly right as far as timeline, because I saw one that the time was not correct on, but that is close enough. In the meantime, what I did was I went in and added the Assyrian leaders with their time frame that they ruled. And so you'll know where they correlate with both Judah and Israel. So that's kind of helpful. Next slide. We've already discussed Obadiah, so tonight we'll go to Joel. And there's where he sits. He's still in this time frame as this, whatever that guy's name is. What's his name? Is Shalmaneser III. Okay. After him, on the timeline would come Shemshad-Adad, and what he does is he can't continue. Next slide. He can't continue in warfare because he's having a war of his own at his hometown. He's got to run back and fight a civil war that's going on there. His brother's trying to steal the throne. So it doesn't expand. The kingdom doesn't expand. So, and we don't get much info on him. And then, next slide. Next guy that comes in makes up for all the lost time. Adad Narnia III. Now, he goes to town. He expands in all directions and fights everybody he can. He's got a 28-year reign, and he uses all 28 of them. He builds Nabu, N-A-B-U, Naba. That's a temple he built in Nineveh, and that was to the false god that he stole when he captured Babylon. He stole this god and then built this temple in Nineveh to this god. This is supposed to be the god of wisdom. They needed it. Yeah, he's a powerful God. This is the time all the way up to Jeroboam II. Because of this guy, they're paying Assyria tribute to keep them from having to go to war. So he was the big bad news. And the next one that comes, the next prophet that we see, next slide, will be Jonah. But that was the whole reason I started this, was to get to Jonah, but I can't get there yet. So tonight, next slide, we're going to go to Joel. All right, here we are in Joel. Joel, so you can turn to the book of Joel. Right. Well, that tells you where the heathen are right now. Mm-hmm. No, I know it helps. And it gets so confusing. I'm going to tell you one thing. Nobody can agree on these dates. I mean, they all have different dates. You know it. And unless it gives you a plain, clear clue in the passage, you really don't know. So some of these are guesses. Some of them are pretty good guesses, but some of them are not. And help yourself to change any of them you want. This is the book of Joel. It's a short little book, 3-chapter book. You can read that in no time flat. Joel's prophecy is directed at Jerusalem. So he's going again in the southern kingdom there. Jerusalem is God's throne room on earth when he'll sit down. The king in Judah is probably one of two. Either Athaliah, the queen, the bloody, wicked queen, or her son, Joash. Now, it's probably right in that middle time period. So she's probably at the end of her reign, and maybe Josiah's come to the throne, or maybe a little later. We'll see as we get into it why you can make a date on it. He was a good king, basically. He was raised by a mentor, Jehoiada, and that was the priest when his mom was out killing people. He was scavenged away and hid off so that she wouldn't get a hold of him. Jehoiada the priest, who was a godly man, raised him, put him on the throne when he was 7 years old, and I mean, no 7-year-old knows how to run a country, but he had good advice from a priest. And as long as that priest lived, he did good. When that priest died, things started going downhill. Now, he reigned 40 years, but he didn't go off the deep end because he had started good. But had he not started so good, he'd have been off the deep end. The message of the book here is to the priesthood. You'll find over and over, this book is very heavy into prophecy. And if you've got any kind of a Bible-believing background, you know all about the prophecy, and it's going to get into some wild stuff in this book. But don't overweight it on one side without balancing it out on the other. The balance is this: he was preaching to someone. Not just prophecy, there's history as well. The history is he's pointing out to the priest there that they need to do their job. Jehoiada has died, and nobody's stepping up as a righteous leader, and they need one. From chapter 1 through chapter 2, verse 17, there's a question one question after the other, but basically the question is, bad stuff's happening, God ain't happy, what are we going to do about it? That's a good question. And he draws some correlations between nature and God. And we need to do that ourselves. When something happens in this life, we need to say it's not about this life. There's something spiritual behind it. And that's what he's going to do in the book. Then from chapter 2:18 to the end of the book, you get the answer to what's going to be done. And the answer doesn't come from anybody but God. God says, nobody can handle what needs to be done. I'll come down there and do it myself. Let's begin. Joel 1, look at verse 1. The word of the Lord that came to Joel, the son of Penuel. Hear this, ye old men, give ear, all ye inhabitants of the land. Hath this been in your days, or even in the days of your fathers? Tell ye your children of it, and let your children tell their children another generation. That which the palmer worm hath left, hath the locust eaten. And that which the locust hath left, hath the cankerworm eaten. And that which the cankerworm hath left, hath the caterpillar eaten. Now, obviously, he's talking about something literal. He's telling them something they know about. It's not something that's unheard of. Now, he's going to get into some things that are unheard of. But to begin his speech, he uses an illustration that they see with their own eyes. Pretty soon the illustration is going to switch off and it can't be literal. It has to be talking about something else. But he doesn't begin that way. He begins with something that is common knowledge. Now, he talks about something that's very devastating. He says, we've never seen anything like this. It'd be like 9/11. Has anybody ever seen a 9/11 happen in this country like that? No, okay. The closest thing, I wasn't alive for it, but JFK, when he got shot, that would have been a close resemblance to 9/11. You know, it shocked everybody and they remember it. Yeah, that's way before my time. Hosea, he talks about these locusts coming in. You can turn to Hosea chapter 13. He's talking about locusts coming in and palmer worms and caterpillars. Obviously, what he's saying is something has come in and devastated the crops. And as soon as we get through with being devastated by one animal, we turn around and another one has got the next crop. Hosea 13, verse 16. Samaria shall become desolate. Samaria, you know where that is. That's not in Judah. That's in Israel. That's northern tribes. For she hath rebelled against her God. They shall fall by the sword. Their infants shall be dashed in pieces, and their women with child shall be ripped up. Whew. Now, they went into captivity first, the northern tribes. Judah should have learned a lesson from it. So wait a minute, when you make God mad, it isn't pretty. But they didn't. Look at, back up to chapter 2, Hosea 2, verse 12. This is the way God fights. He fights with enemy forces. He uses them as pawns. He also uses nature itself to fight against somebody. Hosea 2, verse 12. And I will destroy her vines and her fig trees, whereof she hath said, these are my rewards that my lovers hath given me. And I will make them a forest, and the beast of the field shall eat them. So he turns the animals loose. And that's a scary thing. Not so much now. You know, we're civilized and we've got the animal world under control, we think. But if you lived back then where there was still a lot of property and a lot of land and God stirred up the wild animals to come after you, you'd be in trouble. I would not want to live out in Africa somewhere, you know, where the lions roam free. No, that ain't for me. Exodus chapter 10. One of God's armies that he uses is these locusts. Now, he uses the literal locusts that he made. He's also going to refer to something that is not an animal locust, and he'll refer to it as a locust, but we'll cover that when we get there. But it starts out with the insect. Exodus 10, verse 4. This is Moses going down in Pharaoh and telling him, look, let my people go, and if you don't, God's going to get mad and start doing some warfare. Here's the warfare he does. Exodus 10, verse 4. Else, if thou refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring the locusts into thy coast. That's God's bringing them. They didn't just happen to show up there. It wasn't locust season. God says, I'm bringing them with me. Now, that means he didn't say I'm sending them. He said I'm bringing them. That is, I'll be there too. I'm leading them. Now, a similar thing is going to happen in our book in Joel. Look at 1 Kings. 1 Kings 8, verse 35. 1 Kings 8, verse 35. All of Israel have these words available to them by the time Joel is around. They can read these words. They should have been taught this from their youth up, so they should know these verses that we're talking about in Exodus and 1 Kings. Locust should have been in the back of their mind, as that's something God uses to punish people with. It should be in their mind. Like, people don't talk about it anymore, but he uses hurricanes and earthquakes. That's right. God uses those, still does. And when those happen, everybody acts like, oh, it's just nature. And no, it's God.
Amen.
Now, it may not be every single person that gets affected by that is who he's yelling at, but it means he's mad. Okay? Nothing's outside of his control. Here it is, 1 Kings 8, verse 35. When the heaven is shut up, there is no rain because they have sinned against thee. Solomon's praying. He said, these people are some wicked people out here. He was too. And when they do bad and they've been sinning against you, here's what you would tend to do. Shut up heaven so there's no rain. Drop down to verse 37. If there be in the land famine, if there be pestilence, blasting, mildew, locusts, or if there be caterpillar, if their enemies beseech them in the land of their cities, whatsoever plague, whatsoever sickness there be, so forth, so on. He's going to go on and say if they'll pray toward this place and they'll confess their sins. I'm going to give it to you in another passage. 2 Chronicles 7, verse 13. 2 Chronicles 7, verse 13. Everybody knows this passage, whether you know it or not. You've heard it repeated so many times, but I'm going to show you the context, is locusts. 2 Chronicles 7, verse 13. If I shut up heaven that there be no rain, or if I command locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people which are called by my names, you know that verse. Okay, so what he's saying is there's sometimes I correct my people and I use locusts to do it. Obviously, in Joel's day, that's exactly what's been going on. That's how he opens his sermon. Joel chapter 1, look at verse 5. Joel 1, verse 5. He says, awake, ye drunkards. That's not a way to win friends. He's not appealing to his crowd here. That's okay. He's trying to shock them. He's using a little shock therapy here. Wake up, people, you drunkards, and weep, and howl, all ye drinkers of wine, because of the, what's that? New wine? Is that alcoholic or not? New is not alcoholic. New wine, for it is cut off from your mouth. Now, what new wine was a sign of wealth. They were doing well. They had plenty of grapes. Everything's going good. But he says, you need to wake up. Your harvest just got ate. The bugs came in and stole it. And what are y'all over there just consuming everything you can as though nothing's happened? Wake up. He's done some things here. First of all, we've been given information. His audience that he's preaching to, he informed them. That's the first thing that you do when you talk to somebody. Information. Then they need illumination. That's only something a Christian can give them, or God can. Illumination, what it means. What he's saying is the illumination is locus. Locus. Then the application. I'm talking to you. It's your fault. Wake up. The application is you didn't have to have locusts. They're here because God's mad at you. Oof. Happy sermon. Look at verse 6, Joel 1:6. Now he starts getting really pointed. For a nation is come upon my land, strong and without number, whose teeth are the teeth of a lion, and he hath the teeth of a great lion. Now, he's beginning to transition into something beyond the physical. Maybe we can say he's talking about locusts. He begins to talk about locusts, but pretty soon it can't be any locust you've ever seen or I've ever seen. It's almost like he's slowly transitioning in here, and you can't really tell where he stops talking about the locust that flies versus the one that's supernatural. Verse 7. He hath laid my vine waste, and barked my fig tree. He hath made it clean bare, and cast it away. The branches thereof are made white. Now, more than likely, here he's beginning to refer to Israel as the nation. You see the fig tree and the vine. He says in Isaiah, my people planted a vine. I can't come up with the right verse right now, but you'll find it. Read through Isaiah. Joel, look at verse 13. Joel 1:13. He gets back to preaching to the religious folk, the priest. Gird yourselves and lament, ye priests. How, ye ministers of the altar, come, lie all night in sackcloth, ye ministers of my God. For the meat offering and the drink offering is withholden from the house of your God. He said, there's a reason nobody's bringing anything to the temple. You need to be crying to God for it. It doesn't matter whether or not you've got plenty. They're supposed to be bringing stuff in. They're supposed to be paying the tithe. They're supposed to be doing the sacrifices and all the offerings. That's their worship to God, not a priest's income. By the way, I don't believe that has anything to do with church age. That's not a pastor. That's a priest. Okay, so he says, look, you need to wake up. Just because you've got enough doesn't mean you can relax. Remember, they were drinking the new wine like it was not going out of style. But he says, hey, wake up. People aren't showing up. Therefore, you need to get on your knees and start howling and crying. In essence, what he's saying here is you've withholden from God what was due him. Therefore, God's going to take away from you what you need. He's cleaning out the crops. You find over there in Isaiah, man, I should have talked through this before I printed it. In Isaiah, there's a reference there. He talks about they've not been given to him, so therefore their 10 acres is only going to produce 1 bath. God says, I'm going to reverse things. You're only going to get 1/10, and I'm going to destroy 90% of your crop. Oof. Look at Joel 1, verse 15. Now it starts to get very pointed. Anytime you see this phrase about the day of the Lord. Alas for the day of the Lord is at hand, and as a destruction from the Almighty shall it come. Is not the meat cut off before our eyes? Yea, joy and gladness from the house of our God. Now, I'm going to cover something that's not really in my notes, but we talked about it today. I heard it on the radio. This is a pet peeve I have. If you don't agree with it, that's up to you. You do what you want to with it. The day of the Lord. I've heard so many people use it in so many different ways. I think it has one definition. The day of the Lord. Let's not complicate that. It's one day. It's the second advent. Now notice what he's saying. All of this destruction that's coming is not the day of the Lord. He's saying that's showing the day of the Lord's at hand. That is not the day of the Lord. I was taught that the tribulation is referred to as the day of the Lord. It's not the day of the Lord. Never is one day referred to in the Bible as 7 years. You could say one day is 1,000 years. You could say one day equaled 1 year. But never do you say one day equals 7 years. So I think it's clear the day of the Lord has one interpretation. The second advent, the day he comes down. Had to get that off my chest. Okay. Joel chapter 2, verse 1. Joel 2, verse 1. Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in mine holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand. He's saying what you need to do, the more destruction and the more mad you see God getting, that should be a wake-up call. He's saying here to blow the trumpet. That is to call people together. In World War II, when there was a bombing that would be going on, they would sound a siren, and you would run and hide, whenever that siren went off. When I was growing up in Memphis, we had tornadoes, and you had a tornado siren. And when that thing went off, we went out to see where it was. But smart people ran and hid. But this is what he's doing. Look at verse 15. Joel 2:15. Blow the trumpet in Zion. Sanctify a fast. Call a solemn assembly. That is, get serious about this. You need to seek God, is what he's saying. Back to Joel 2. Look at verse 2. Here's what this day of the Lord's going to be like. A day of darkness and of gloominess, A day, not 7 days, not 70 days, not 70 weeks, 1 day. 1 day of darkness, a day of clouds, and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains. A great people and strong. There hath not been ever the like, neither shall be any more ever, neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. So he's saying here, something's coming, and you've never seen anything like it. Now, it can't be locusts, because we've seen many times that there's been locusts, and there's been many days like a bad locust, what do they call it? Locust herd? Swarm, locust swarm. In fact, just last year, they were saying that twice in Africa, they had the worst locusts they had ever seen, historically. Well, that's obviously not what he's talking about. That wasn't a fulfillment. But that thing happened in Africa, and some people saw it. I didn't see it, but some people saw it. And so what he's talking about here can't compare to that. And we're going to see he's not talking about animals in a minute. Now, he could be talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, and more than likely he is. Jerusalem has been destroyed 3 times. At the time he's speaking here, it has not happened yet. The northern tribes have not gone into captivity. All of this should be a warning. The southern kingdom has not gone in. And it's coming. Matter of fact, it's going to keep repeating. In our time, not our time, in the Old Testament, you find it, Sennacherib comes in, and then Nebuchadnezzar comes in. Then, in between the Old Testament and the New Testament, we're going to find another time it gets attacked, 70 AD. Titus destroys it. But that's still not the same as our verse. Notice something in our verse. He says, great people and strong, there hath not ever been the like. That's verse 2. So whenever Jerusalem was destroyed, it was always destroyed by an army similar to the one before it that destroyed it. What's coming is something that's not like a human army. And that'll be something different. Look at Joel 2, verse 3. Here's this army that's coming. It's supposed to be locusts. See if you've seen any locusts like this. A fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the Garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness. Yea, and nothing shall escape them. Now, I know a lot of people try to read into that whatever modern machinery they have. We always try to put ourselves or force the Bible to say something that is current to us. I don't think it's anything that's current to us. We'll keep going and we'll find out it's something beyond anything we've ever seen. Revelation, look at Revelation 19. Revelation 19, verse 11. And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True. And in righteousness he doth judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. And he had a name written that no man knoweth but he himself. And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies, plural, there's those locusts, which were in heaven, followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. He's the only one that got bloody. They were white and clean before they hit earth. Verse 15. And out of his mouth goeth a sharp two-edged sword, and that with it he should smite the nations, plural. And he should rule them with a rod of iron, and he treadeth the winepress of the fierceness of the wrath of Almighty God. So forth, so on. Now he's talking about Armageddon. This is literally the day of the Lord, when he comes down leading 2 armies plural, from heaven. We'll get into this. I don't know how much time. Well, we probably better break it there. But we're going to find he's leading 2 armies from heaven. One of them is riding on horses, and one of them's riding on donkeys. And they're coming down, and they're going to stomp, and that's what he's referring to as locusts. We'll go, as we get into that, I better not give it away too much. But as we get into that, you'll see that these locusts can't die. A sword can go through them, and they don't die. Okay, well, that ain't like no locust I've ever seen. I don't even think you could get a locust on a sword. So this is something totally different, and he's projecting way out into the future, tribulation and millennium. When the day of the Lord shows up, we know exactly what he's talking about. And just to imagine, he's doing all of this way back in the Old Testament before they had a clue about all of this. We've gotten so much information at our fingertips in the New Testament. They didn't have a clue about any of that. Yet God was giving them revelation in the Old Testament without the book of Daniel, without revelation. They were getting plenty of information. Now Daniel does come along and fills in some gaps. And I think we probably have more information now. Not that we have any understanding. We've got more information now than they ever did. But these guys had some understanding. All right, we'll finish maybe a few verses next week.